The Browns really only have two options when it comes to the number 2 overall pick and what to do with it. Take a QB or trade out. I'll explain coming up next on the Locked On Browns podcast.
You are Locked On Browns, your daily Cleveland Browns podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, Dog Pound? I'm Spencer German, your host in the Locked On Browns podcast. I'm proudly covering your Cleveland Browns each and every single day in the land and on the road. There are only two real options for the Browns with the number 2 overall pick. Also, I'm becoming more and more convinced that of those two options, it's going to be take a quarterback at number 2. And Trevor Lawrence, anybody interested in him? An interesting trade was floated from a report out there. We'll get into that as well. I do want to thank you for being an everydayer at the Locked On Browns podcast and for making us your first listen every single day. I have gone back and forth with you on what the Browns' options are at the number 2 overall pick that they have at their disposal. There are plenty of reasons and arguments to be made why they should take a quarterback, why they should maybe trade back, why they should take somebody else, maybe an Abdul Carter, for example, who is one of the more highly rated players in this class just in general. I have come to the conclusion, though, that I think there's only two real options for this team. They either take a quarterback at number 2 because they believe in their heart of hearts that one of these guys, one of these top guys, Cam Ward, Shedeur Sanders, we know the names at this point, truly can be like a starting caliber quarterback in the NFL and be the quarterback that they are looking for, or they trade out, trade back, as I've talked about before, and accumulate as many picks as possible to set yourself up for future success, future team building, whether it's drafting guys this year or next year. That's it. Those are the only real two options in my mind. And let me explain, because there's going to be plenty of people who jump down my throat on this and jump in the comments and say, what are you talking about? If Abdul Carter's there too, you just take Abdul Carter. Here's the thing, though. If the Browns become, if you don't become sold on a quarterback, if you're the Browns, you're basically saying okay, we are more than a quarterback away in that instance. And knowing that quarterbacks go with such a high value, you're doing yourself a disservice if you don't float the pick out there in trade talks and try to move off that spot and get some picks in return and move further back in the draft. Because if the Browns, if they don't take a quarterback, then they're essentially pivoting to, all right, we're going to address other needs that we have first. And if the quarterback, a quarterback can mask a lot of your other issues, a lot of your other deficiencies or problems. We saw that, I think, with Washington this year and Jaden Daniels. He was so good that, their defense not being very good, it didn't matter for most of the season until you got to the playoffs and you played a juggernaut like the Eagles. But my point stands, though, if you're not taking quarterback, you have a bunch of other holes you got to address. One player at a different position isn't going to fix all that the way a quarterback does. And so you would be silly not to trade the pick and move back and accumulate as many picks as possible. The best way to prioritize all those needs is to get more picks, get more bites at the apple if you're Andrew Berry and you're looking to supplement and find a number of different things to fill. You want as many, darts to throw at the board as you can. And because the more you get, the more chances you are to hit on guys, which we know has been somewhat of an issue for Andrew Berry throughout his tenure here with the Browns. That doesn't mean that there won't be a good player there. Like I mentioned, Abdul Carter could be available at 2, or probably will be available at 2, because I'm guessing the Titans do take a quarterback. Travis Hunter, versatile player. A lot has been said about what he could do in the NFL. Everyone's really high on him, expect a lot from him at the next level. I think he will translate very well to one of the two positions he plays, or maybe both. I know Deion Sanders is going around talking about how he thinks he showed everybody how to use him. You can use him both ways, and he thinks that that's viable in the NFL. So maybe some team would want to do that. I don't know. I don't know if that's the Browns, but maybe some team. But regardless, I get there's still going to be talented players there. I just think you're better off. What's the major difference between drafting Abdul Carter at, say, 2 and trading back to maybe ending up at 6 with the Raiders? Or, you could trade back one spot with the Giants to 3, and no one's really the wiser, because if they take a quarterback and you weren't going to take one anyway, then you're only back one more spot and you still have somebody like Abdul Carter on the board with more picks at your disposal. But again, I don't know that there's a massive difference, even if you did go back to, say, 6 with the Raiders and you would take Mason Graham, who could be a foundational piece on your defensive line for years to come, instead of taking Abdul Carter, or maybe a Will Johnson, also out of Michigan, as a sort of future staple cornerback for you, or a Will Campbell, who, could be a starting left tackle for you at the next level, or at least a starting foundational offensive lineman for you. So the drop off, or the difference between those guys from like Travis Hunter and Abdul Carter, I don't think it's like so vast that you'd be like that you're like really costing yourself. Like, I like to think about these things and like, how many wins does this player net you? Like the win total you're getting from like an Abdul Carter added to your total versus like a Mason Graham or a Will Johnson or a Will Campbell, like I mentioned. I don't think it's that crazy, because I don't even though I know Abdul Carter's great and I really like Abdul Carter, I don't know that he's Myles Garrett, like, especially not right away. There's still some elements of his game as a linebacker turned defensive end or edge rusher that I think he has to iron out. And so I don't know that like his impact is going to be what Myles Garrett's impact is at this stage of his career, obviously. And so those are basically your options. Like, I understand where, yeah, you could just stay pat and take best player available, but I just think that does you a disservice to not, consider. And it's not that I don't think Andrew Berry won't consider it, but it's basically for me, like, you either take a quarterback because you feel very, deep in your convictions that one of these guys is going to be a starter for you, maybe a top 10 guy in this league at some point, and is what you're looking for at that position. And so you pull the trigger because you have to. You got to overdraft quarterbacks. You almost always have to. Or you trade back. Taking a player at 2 and just standing pat doesn't feel like the best, option for the Browns to get this thing back on track as quickly as possible. You'd be silly not to trade back if you're not taking a quarterback. And again, just accumulate the picks. Still be able to get a really good player in the top 10. And at the same time, know and understand that you also have more picks at your disposal, maybe this year and obviously next year in 2026, when you might feel better about drafting a quarterback than if you don't take one this year. But I do think they will be taking a quarterback, and I'll explain more coming up here in shortly. But those are the two options for me. People are going to make their case for standing pat, I'm sure, and just taking a Travis Hunter or taking an Abdul Carter. But as we get more and more clarity on this thing, like that's it. Those are the two options you have. It's draft that QB that you feel very, passionately about and you think is going to be great at the next level, or trade out and understand you might be giving up the rights to an Abdul Carter or a Travis Hunter, but that you're still going to get a really good player. And you also then have, again, the draft capital to replenish your roster faster over the course of the next 2 years, which is the primary goal here. The primary goal is get this roster rounded into form, back to competitiveness as soon as possible in 2025 and in 2026. And the more picks you have, the better chance you have of doing that. So that's where I'm at with it. It feels like a no-brainer to me. Those are the two options. I do think, though, at this point, reading the tea leaves, the streets are talking. It feels like there's a more than likely chance that the Browns are going to go with option A, take a quarterback. I'll explain the latest and why I honestly have come around to the idea of that being the smart move when we get back here on the Locked On Browns podcast. As a small business owner, your work doesn't end when the clock hits 5. Your business is always on your mind, which means when it's time to hire, you need a partner that works just as hard as you do. That's where LinkedIn Jobs comes in. When you clock out, LinkedIn clocks in. LinkedIn makes it easy to post your job for free, share it with your network, and get qualified candidates all in one place. Post your job. LinkedIn's new feature can help you write job descriptions and then quickly get your job in front of the right people with deep candidate insights. And here's a pro tip. Add the hashtag hiring frame to your profile picture to double your reach to qualified candidates. No wonder 72% of small businesses say LinkedIn helps them find high-quality hires. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. All right, so I mentioned that the Browns really only have two realistic options with the number 2 overall pick. You either take that quarterback or you trade back. That's it. I'm not staying pat and taking a player. I'm just not doing it. If that's what you want to do, I get it. I'm not there. You got to maximize the potential of this roster. Best way to do that is either to get that quarterback that you think is the one, or trade back, accumulate picks. Know you can fill the roster with a higher supplement of picks than maybe you had before. I think those are the two options. But I do think that one of those options is already starting to feel like it's more likely, and that is the take a quarterback route. There are a number of reasons why I think that's the case. I think there was the video going around this week, Shedeur Sanders talking about how one of his first meetings, if not his first meeting, of when it comes to pre-draft, in-person conversations at the team facility, that these pre-draft meetings that these teams get. Shedeur's first one is with the Browns. So he'll have a pre-draft visit early March, stop by, get a lay of the land, all those different things. And it's starting to feel like already that the Browns are gung-ho about Shedeur Sanders. They were at the Shrine Bowl watching him, and I get it. Like, we haven't had an opportunity yet to see them interact with Cam Ward because he wasn't at the Shrine Bowl. He wasn't at the Senior Bowl. He hasn't had his pro day yet, obviously. I'm assuming he'll be at the Combine and go through some things there, and so they'll have a chance to talk to him there, and that'll be maybe one of their first interactions. But yeah, like, regardless, it feels like Shedeur is starting to gain some traction when it comes to the Browns and their interest in him. I heard Mary Kay Cabot this on Thursday morning with 92 through the Fan. She mentioned that she doesn't see the Browns not taking a quarterback at 2. And she's obviously one of the more tapped in people on this beat in this business. So she has some insight into that. And I think just in general, the streets are kind of talking. And it seems more and more as the days go by, as the weeks go by, that the Browns are all in on the idea of taking a quarterback at 2, which I'm sure pleases you. Maybe, I know there's kind of varying opinions on this, but there's plenty of Browns fans who feel that is the route they should go. That you're in this position only so often. You got to take a quarterback while you're here. I don't necessarily, think that the conversations about this class being as bad as the 2022 class are as valid as they once were. I think I understood, like, for surface level, why that was the case. But as I've watched more tape on these guys, like, I think Jackson Dart, as I talked about on yesterday's show, could be a solid player in this league if he can, get coached up enough to maybe go through his progressions faster. And I know somebody mentioned, and I didn't mention this yesterday, but I know it's true too. Like, his footwork needs to be a little bit better. There's parts of his game that I think translate, though. His athleticism, his ability to run the football, the fact that he, has shown an ability to go through progressions. It's just he kind of does it a little bit slower. And, I think he can make all the throws from short to long down the field bombs. So, like, I think he could be better than people, like some of the guys in that 2022 class. So, I think there's a good amount of quarterbacks here that could be something. I think it's just there's more mystery to them than last year, or there's more questions to their games than last year. And that's why we're not as high on it. And that makes sense. I have my doubts about this class too, but I'm also, coming around to the idea of, listen, if you don't have a quarterback, there's the old saying, you take one every year. I understand there's more risk with taking one at 2 because there's a number 1 pick. And if you fail at that, like, your job's on the line anyway. But if you're Andrew Berry, like, you gotta swing big, and you also have to, like, your job's on the line anyway. Now, again, I've said before, that doesn't mean you just do it to panic. Like, you don't just take one to take one. If they really don't like one of these guys, then okay, you go with option 2, which is trade back and accumulate picks and fill other holes. But I don't think that's the case. Like, I think Andrew Berry is coming around to maybe Shedeur, but at least, one or two of these top 2 guys. And I mean, Berry himself even said at the Senior Bowl that he does see a starter in this draft. He didn't necessarily make it clear if it was like one, multiple, whatever, but him saying that out loud tells you, like, yeah, they seem all in on this. They seem all in on getting as much information as possible about these quarterbacks and figuring out which one of these guys they believe is the guy for them that is going to be a starter at the next level. And if he gets that answered, I think it answers a lot of questions about him as a GM, Andrew Berry, that is. I think it solves a lot of your problems, and it starts getting the organization back on track more quickly than maybe people think they could. Listen, there's a lot that still has to play out, obviously, and there are still a lot of things that this team has to address, and there's still all the offseason things to go through. But as things stand right now, like, I can't help but I'm not going to sit here and ignore all the tea leaves, all the information that are pointing to the Browns seem really gung-ho about the idea of taking a quarterback, and it seems like they're doing their due diligence to figure out to identify which of those guys it is. Like I said, Shador seems like it's where it's leaning right now, but we haven't seen a lot of them interact with Cam Ward to this point. And I think that's fine. Like I said, there's the old adage, you take a quarterback until you find one. And again, first round pick, number 2 pick, there's always a little bit more pressure added to it. You can't miss when it comes to that pick. But I also don't think these GMs operate that way. Like if they're confidently making a pick at that spot, and that's been my thing all along. I have had my doubts about this class, yes, but I also don't think now that they're as bad as 2022. And I also think from the start, I've said, yes, I might have my doubts, but if they watch, as long as they, and again, I have my own questions about Andrew Berry being the evaluator on this and finding the right guy. But with Kevin Stefanski's help, I'm assuming he's giving some insight into what player they think is going to be the best fit for his system, for his scheme, what they want to do. Great. That's how it should be. That's exactly what you should be doing through this process. It shouldn't just be Andrew Berry picking blindly and hoping that sticks, because they did that with Deshaun Watson, and clearly it didn't work out. They thought they could make it work. They didn't. You need to find a guy that's going to fit what Stefanski wants to do. And so my thing all along has been, as long as they find that guy and they work together to identify the player that they think is great, and if they have a high grade on him, if they have a first-round grade or a top 10 grade on one of these guys that they're in their convictions, we got to take him at 2, I can live with that. Even if it means that they get it wrong and he gets and they get fired in the end, I can live with that. What I can't live with is, well, we just took one because we know our jobs are on the line, and it doesn't sound like that's the case here. Andrew Berry's out there saying he thinks there's starters in this draft. They're meeting with them. So as long as they do their due diligence, and as long as they come away with the idea or the feeling or the sense that this class has the guy they're looking for, then I think I can accept that they take 1 or 2, even if I have some doubts about whether or not you should, be taking one that high. Because I still, even though I said your 2 options are take a quarterback or trade back, I still obviously I'm hesitant that any of these guys are worth the number 2 overall pick. But I also understand it's the nature of the NFL. You got to take a quarterback where you can take a quarterback. And if that's your chance to take one because that's where you're slotted, you got to pull the trigger, because you can't, you can't wait around and hope, because they'll be gone. You have to overdraft quarterbacks. I said it earlier. You got to overdraft quarterbacks. It's just the way it is in this league. And so I think that's probably what ends up happening for most of the guys in this class, but that's the nature of the beast. So again, early, still very much early. We haven't even gotten to the combine yet. It's only mid-February. But the sense I get is that, again, the streets are talking. The Browns really are serious about drafting a quarterback at 2, and they'll continue to figure out which player that is, and who they're going to pick. But I would not I think it's starting to feel that way, and I'm sure that has plenty of Browns fans excited, because that is the ultimate card, right? If you have the quarterback figured out, all of a sudden a lot of things take care of themselves. I've said I don't know that Shador or any of these guys are going to be Jaden Daniels, but if you stabilize that position with a top 10 potential quarterback, all of a sudden winning becomes a little bit easier. Maybe all of a sudden Myles Garrett eases his trade request. Who knows? There's a lot of possibilities there if you get that position right. And so I can understand why they're, doing their homework on these guys and will identify the one they think is best. And likely it feels right now, pull the trigger on one to start changing the fortunes of this franchise. As we talk about the rookie quarterbacks, I want to pivot to a potential veteran quarterback. This might sound like pie in the sky, but it was floated that a division rival of the Browns has reached out about the availability of Trevor Lawrence. Would that do anything for you, Browns fans, if the Browns got in on something like that? We'll talk about it coming up next on the Locked On Browns podcast. When the game tips off, the NBA action is just getting started, and there's no better place to get in on it than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. With FanDuel, you can place live bets throughout the game, so even if you miss the opening tip-off or want to bet on a fourth-quarter comeback, you can stay in the action. And if you're looking for a bigger payout, you can even combine your live bets into a same-game parlay. With the NFL season behind us, you already know I'm going to be betting a lot of the Cleveland Cavaliers, given the season they're having, top in the East, all those different things. And there's some really good opportunities to cash out big. That can be true for you as well when you bet on the NBA. Plus, the app is easy to use, and when you win, you get paid instantly. Right now, FanDuel customers, new FanDuel customers, get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. All right, I talk about the streets talking, and there was a trade scenario floated. I shouldn't even say scenario because it was not floated. This was like reported, like vetted and reported by Ryan Burr, which might sound like it's a fake name, but it is not. He covers Big Ten hoops, PGA Tour Live. He's the owner of his own, I guess, like media company. I don't know, but legitimate reporter. He's followed by a number of different people in the business, and he is putting out there that the Pittsburgh Steelers have made inquiries to the Jacksonville Jaguars about a trade for quarterback Trevor Lawrence. He adds that the Steelers would deal, and he said he heard this directly from the horse's mouth in the Jags. Steelers would deal their number 1 and number 2 picks this year. He did note that Pittsburgh maybe would withhold their first round pick next year because the draft is in Pittsburgh next year. So we'll see about that. But I know this isn't Locked On Steelers, so I don't want to go down the rabbit hole of like, what would this mean for Pittsburgh? Although there is an angle there because I do think that gets the Steelers back on par with the best teams in the division when you have a quarterback like that. But I'm curious people's thoughts, your thoughts on if this is true, like if teams are calling about Trevor Lawrence, if with this getting out, if the Steelers are inquiring, the Browns should too. And if Trevor Lawrence was actually available, what would you be willing to give up for? Would you be willing to give up a first this year and your first next year to land a quarterback of that caliber? It's interesting because you didn't have first round picks the last 3 years. And, I think to give up your next 2 would be a detriment to this organization when you really need to start accumulating talent and you really need to start, figuring out what this kind of looks like moving forward and getting the roster younger and built more towards the future than just like the now. But at the same time, like, I don't know if there's a way you could trade the number 2 pick now and get a couple picks for the next couple years and then go make a trade like this for Trevor Lawrence. Like maybe you could trade with the Giants, get a pick this year and a pick next year, and then trade 2 of those for, Trevor Lawrence or something like that and set yourself up where you still have a first rounder next year. I don't know what that all would look like. I'm guessing the Jaguars, there wasn't a lot reported on, like, other than him throwing out the scenario, Ryan Burr here throwing out the scenario of where the Steelers would trade their first and second this year picks. But other than that, like, I don't know what else like the Jags are looking for. I'm going to guess Shad Khan and company are looking for a haul for Trevor Lawrence because they drafted him with the intention of like, he's our franchise quarterback. He was a top pick overall. Like all those different things apply. And I get it. Like there's been some inconsistencies to Trevor Lawrence's game. He felt like he took a massive step forward year 1 with Doug Peterson. And then he took a massive step back. And this year he wasn't quite the same player. Granted, I think he actually played well. I don't think he was part of Jacksonville's problems so much this year. As much as they had other deficiencies and other issues that were sort of weighing them down or bogging them down. But I thought he played pretty well overall. And I think obviously there's still a chance that he's going to be a top quarterback or a top 10 quarterback in this league and that he can get his career very much back on track. Yeah, I mean, he only threw for 2,045 yards this year, 11 touchdowns, 7 interceptions. So there were some flaws. There's some inconsistencies to his game. He also this year only played in 10 games because of injuries. And that's maybe the biggest concern I have with Trevor Lawrence is just the injury issues and the fact that I think he had an AC joint this past year. He's had concussions before. I know he had a leg injury the year before that because it happened before he played the Browns that season in 2023. So like the injuries continue to pile up for him. And that's where I think my biggest concern lies. But I do still think there's some untapped potential with Trevor Lawrence. And I think Kevin Stefanski would be the right coach to maybe help him settle down and correct some of those things and get him back on track. Because we've seen Kevin Stefanski work with quarterbacks like a Baker Mayfield before and make them better in a more structured offense. And so I could see some of that. I think there's definitely some truth to that if he were to come here. Now, like I said, the biggest thing comes down to what do you want to give up? Would you give up a first rounder this year and next year for Trevor Lawrence? Is he worth that? I don't know if I want to pull the trigger on giving up 2 more firsts, especially, and it also comes down to like how you evaluate this quarterback class. If you feel Shedeur Sanders is going to be a top 10 guy, maybe you take him and roll the dice rather than go trade for Trevor Lawrence. But I was intrigued by this because because it was the Steelers, but B, because I wasn't really under the indication or the impression that somebody like Trevor Lawrence would be available. And maybe he's not available and the Steelers were just calling. But Andrew Berry should definitely pick up the phone, see what the price is. Because if it's only going to be a first and a second, I say yes. If it's going to be multiple firsts, I get a little bit weary because I know this team has to fix so much, down the roster and depth-wise that you're going to want those picks the next couple of years. And you'd basically be going 5 years straight without a first-round pick unless you do what I said and trade the number 2 pick right now, get a couple picks, and then understand like you still have a first-rounder if you traded 2 first-rounders. But other than that, like it's interesting because I see a lot of potential in Trevor Lawrence. He was one of these guys coming out of college that was like the next big thing, like an Andrew Luck type, where you felt like, he was fail-proof, or he was going to go in and play at a high level, and that hasn't really been realized. He hasn't necessarily had the best team around him, so maybe a change of scenery would help that. I don't know. I'm at least intrigued, and I want to know more on like what the value is because I think Trevor Lawrence has the potential to still be a really good quarterback in this league. Do you have any interest in Trevor Lawrence as a potential option? It feels pie in the sky. You just never know with this league, though. You just never know. And the Steelers are picking up the phone, so you might as well too, Browns. We'll talk some more about the quarterback position, what they should do, and I want your guys' questions. It's a Fan Friday tomorrow, so send me your questions either in the comments section at the YouTube channel here for Locked On Browns, or you can hit me up on Twitter at Spencito_. We like to get fan involvement, talk about things. It doesn't have to be questions, just topics that are on your mind that you might want to hit on a Fan Friday, and we will get to those tomorrow. In the meantime, I do want to thank you for making this your first listen every day. For your second listen, check out a new Locked On NFL show, or if you want to keep it local, you can check out Locked On Cavs or Locked On Guardians. Thanks for being an everydayer at the Locked On Podcast Network. I will talk to you again real soon, Cleveland. But for now, peace.